Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers, and I welcome you to Insight with Javed Malik. And of course, as you know, that we often bring to you programs involving personalities from Britain and Europe. The relationship between the Muslim communities living in Britain and of course the indigenous community after the 7/7 bombings have been under the focus. People have alleged that the government has of course dealt with in some areas heavy-handedly, where we have examples of the Forest Gate. We've had positive examples as well, where the authorities have dealt with prudence and with impartiality too. Today I'm sitting with a member of parliament, somebody who has been a former minister, currently is a special envoy of the Prime Minister on interfaith matters, the Right Honourable John Battle, MP. Mr. Battle, first of all, I welcome you to the programme.
Good to be here.
The relationship between the Muslim community and the indigenous community, particularly after the 7/7 bombing, has been under the spotlight. How do you think authorities have dealt with the matter in terms of, first of all, keeping the community on the side and at the same time taking out those undesirable elements?
Yeah, I think I start from a completely different end of the telescope, if you like, because I don't see the Muslim community as one great huge block in Britain. It's not homogenous, it's not all in one place. And I think also the politics isn't all homogenous either. London top-down push.
Yes.
We have voted in constituencies, so I tend to break it up to the areas. And I live in Leeds, and in my own neighbourhood, that's where the terror bomb factory was. And that's where 4 of the men that went to London and blew up tube stations and the buses came from. Some years ago, a woman came to my home from the house behind us when our children were small, and she brought a silver dish of wonderful, wonderful sweet rice, one wet November night. We lived in those back-to-back terraced houses in the inner city, that cave slice of Leeds where I live. And she just said, she spoke hardly any English, she said, "It's for you." And I knew her and her family lived behind. We'd only lived there a short while. I learned from that. We took the rice in and shared it with our children. What's this? We'd take the silver dish back, and we learnt about Ramadan, and we learnt about Eid and sharing with your neighbours. That woman was the mother of one of the people that went to London to blow up a subway. So I have to ask lots of questions when I'm asking, what is all this about? The big picture and what's happening on the ground. I'd have to say to you...
Did you know any of those boys that are allegedly...
Yes, I did, and I have to say that it was a shock to everyone. I don't think it was simply a coordination. Somebody rang up someone from Al-Qaeda and said, "It's you, mate, next, and go for it." I don't want to be trivial about it, but I don't think it was as simple as that. I certainly didn't believe it was advice from the mosques. And I visit many mosques. There are 17 mosques in my city, 4 in my own neighbourhood. So I didn't believe it was that quick fix. I think we underestimate the role of new communications, DVDs, new telecommunications that can be downloaded on a mobile, so we can know instantly what's happening elsewhere in the world in all kinds of places. And so there's a whole area there, if you're watching DVDs of Chechnya in a basement, and pretty horrific events happening to people who you regard as your brothers and sisters, and rightly so, that can have quite a horrifying galvanizing effect.
People have argued that these young people who allegedly carried out these particular bombings, you know, they were brought up in Britain, they were born there. They may have visited another country at some point in their lives, but one short visit, or even if it's a long visit, doesn't really completely recondition your mind. They're basically homegrown from Britain. So perhaps it is the British policy in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and other places that have sort of made them feel disillusioned.
I'd have to say, in my neighbourhood, people came to me asking me, could the British government go into Afghanistan to protect the people from the Taliban? So Afghanistan is a different issue, really, because people were petitioning, and we do remember everyone went to the UN and asked the UN to go into Afghanistan, so it's a different position from Iraq. I also have to say, in Leeds, no one ever raised with me, I voted against the Iraq war. I had petitions outside my house because I was voting against that war. People wanted the Britain to go in. I was unpopular while it happened, including, I have to say, among some Muslims. And some of the Muslims in my neighbourhood, their biggest concern has not been Iraq, nor has it been Afghanistan, nor has it been Palestine, it's been Kashmir. And that's been the issue for them. just as in my neighbourhood. In my family, when I was a child...
But do you think that, would you, as a member of the government, as a member of parliament, somebody who's been a minister in the Foreign Office, you're currently Prime Minister's envoy, how do you respond when you're asked about the double standards that are sometimes apparent in the way the British policy is in the Middle East?
Double standards on everything, all the time. That's why I've resigned and voted against every war in the government. But you have to have a view and to argue. Unfortunately, I lost the vote. If more people had voted with me, including Conservatives and others who are all against this war, including Liberals who were voting against this war, we might have a different policy. So I think double standards, it plays both ways, because people, I think, have short memories and they do change their minds. I think with regard, though, to the atmosphere, for example, some people came to our neighbourhood and said, well, the reason is poverty. But ironically, the young men that were involved in the bombing were not the poorest of the poor. The Bangladeshi people are the poorest in my neighbourhood. And I'd have to say they weren't regarded as the poorest of the poor in the neighbourhood. They'd had the breaks for education, for example, that others hadn't. So we can't easily put a template on and say it's poverty and oppression. There's something else going on. I think it's something to do with what I'd call the new connections of the global village. There's no doubt about that, and international politics plays to that. But there's some kind of, I would think, nostalgia kind of politics in there, and a loss of a sense of identity. It's this confusion about identity and where do we belong, that lostness, and we're not really
Who's responsible, though, for that lack of identity or that confusion that is there present in the minds of young kids who have grown up in your constituency? I mean, who would you hold responsible for that?
Probably God, actually, for getting to born somewhere and not another place. So I think it's to say there's someone responsible. When I was a child, my relatives came from Ireland. And
but if they were given equal opportunity...
Oh, no, they weren't.
If, for example, these young boys were given equal opportunity in terms of... There is discrimination, there's Islamophobia, there are people who are facing victimization within, even prior to 7/7. Do you think it's a failure, though, of the government in order to provide a level playing field to young children from migrant communities?
I used to get stoned as a kid for being Irish. In my neighbourhood, when I went to school, I used to go around saying, I'm not British.
And how did you deal with it?
I'm not British, I'm not Irish, I'm Yorkshire. And we lived in what was called the Irish ghetto. And you had to work through that. There was discrimination. I completely accept there's discrimination. And you have to take discrimination out of the system. You have to pass laws to do it. It's not that easy, because the minute you do it, people accuse you of being politically correct. And that's going on now, because people then say, I haven't got the right to say to someone what I want to say. I want to be a racist, and I have the right to go and accuse them, abuse them in public. Well, you have to actually tackle that agenda all the time. But I don't think it's that easy. You can pass a law in Parliament and hope it happens on the ground. And that's where I think the real politics are on the ground. When the bombs went off in London, people looked to Leeds. We were crawling with media.
Yes.
400 cameras. I went back to Leeds early that morning from a conversation with the Home Secretary. Said, John, unfortunately, it's your neighbourhood. My neighbourhood was tipped out onto the street. 400 people were evacuated. And I went to try and find where they'd gone. A sports centre was made available, but they weren't there. There were only 43 people there. Where were the other people? Well, I went round the houses in that immediate neighbourhood, knocked on the doors myself and said, are you okay? And what did I find? The people took their neighbours into their homes, even though they'd never spoken to them before. They never asked them their class, their race, their religion, their colour. They accepted, you're out on the street because of this event, we'll accept you and put you up in our home, make you welcome until this is over. So there was a great response. So when the pressure's really on, people act in community locally. So I don't think there's a big national response that you could pass a law in Parliament and hope that everybody loves each other. You have to work at it in detail on the ground all the time.
Right. Whereas, of course, John Battle is, in addition to being a member of Parliament and formerly a minister in the Foreign Office, is currently Prime Minister Tony Blair's envoy on interfaith matters. In his role, of course, one of the things that he does is he brings about understanding between the various communities living in Britain. Your role as an envoy, a Prime Minister's envoy on interfaith matter, what does it entail, and how does that enable you to bring communities together?
Well, it started from the President of Indonesia. I went to Indonesia and was very, very involved as the Foreign Minister, because Indonesia and East Timor were fighting each other, if you remember. And the British government, I led in the British government to take the UN in to hold the peace. Now, it wasn't very popular at the time either, though now we like intervention, then we don't. People were shouting, get in there. It was a peaceful mission. But the President, Wahid, came to thank Tony Blair, it wasn't big news at the time, for his efforts to get a UN mission into Indonesia. And he came back to number 10. This was before